I think you should save that because with compounding interest in like 30, 40 years, it could be worth a lot of money.
Have you ever noticed that a lot of baby boomers give really bad economics and finance advice?
Really love that beach. I love the memories we've had there. And you know what? When you're old and you have kids, you'll take them there too. And it'll be the same. The beach will be fine. What an interesting year 2060 will be. It'll be normal and good. I'm telling you, work hard now, focus on your job, and then when you're old, you can retire, relax, and travel the world. And one day you could be president because there will be a president in the future and not a corporation that controls all the sources of drinkable water on the earth.
So this TikTok by Machino Dorito is obviously just making fun of a lot of particularly baby boomers who grew up in a very unique moment in history. They grew up on the back of the New Deal and ushered in the Reagan era, which is really interesting because as a political force, baby boomers on the whole, and to be clear, it's not every baby boomer, but on the whole, voted for Reaganomics politicians, and not just within the Republican Party, within the Democratic Party too. One could say that Reagan's policies have never really left us, and we're still dealing with Reaganomics elected. But Reaganomics really was this big problem specifically because it's kind of a generational time bomb. They basically gutted a lot of the social safety nets and like basic programs that allowed the economy to continue itself, like quite literally investing in basic infrastructure, like roads, bridges, dams, power grid, and even sometimes investing in like housing cooperatives that happened under the New Deal. Well, by tearing apart these social programs, by tearing apart public universities, by taking away funding from public schools, by taking away funding from all of these different social safety net programs and deprioritizing investments in infrastructure and privatizing a lot of infrastructure, baby boomers managed to basically gut the United States economy in such a way that allowed for short-term profits for baby boomers as a generation, but left a lot of millennials and Gen Z folks without real economic opportunities because now college is incredibly expensive, wages are incredibly low, the privatization of a bunch of our infrastructure has put us in a position where now the infrastructure is crumbling and these private companies want the government to pay the bill, but also don't want the government money to go to paying the bills. They just want to bring in profits and not actually use the money for what they say it's for when the government gives it to them. So we're put in this terrible situation where our infrastructure is crumbling, our economy is collapsing, people can't afford to eat food, people can't afford to buy an apartment or a house, and now we're at the point where working class people are so broke that housing has grown so unaffordable that now these big institutional investors are coming in and buying up houses with cash and forcing more and more people into the rental market so that realistically millennials and Gen Z folks really just don't have the opportunity to own anything within our economy. But from the baby boomers' perspective, they don't really see any of this. Baby boomers grew up in an environment where they could always expect more next year. They could always expect that continuously over time, their quality of life would increase. And by and large, it has. But the way that they managed to get their specific economic growth that they did as a generation ended up sabotaging the economic growth of everybody after them. They quite literally pulled up the ladder behind them and are still sitting on a ridiculous amount of wealth as a generation. And so when they offer a lot of advice to like millennials or Gen Z folks, like, oh, just pay off college by having a summer job, not realizing that your summer job would have to pay you something like 6 figures in order to like cover your expenses of living and college. And who's gonna make 6 figures during one summer doing a summer job when you haven't graduated yet? The math just doesn't match. Their expectations and assumptions about how the economy work just doesn't mesh with reality. And the same is true especially considering things like climate change. Baby boomers knew about climate change as a generation, but didn't take it seriously. And now as climate change is starting to show and manifest its worst effect, baby boomers really only have a few more decades of life to look forward to and don't expect to see the worst that climate change has to offer. And so when it comes to all of these different issues that are facing our society, baby boomers have basically shrugged it off as something that's not going to affect them. Whereas millennials and Gen Z folks look forward and really don't see much of a future. Millennials are the first generation in the United States to expect a worse life than their parents. And Gen Z folks are in the same boat. And in all likelihood, we're all sort of rocketing on this trajectory where there isn't an expectation that you will have a retirement plan or a pension. There isn't an expectation that you can even have a savings account because you can barely afford your student loan. And a lot of these baby boomers are still operating on the assumption that student debt's not that big of a deal, or it's not that much money, or that you can just get a higher paying job by going to college no matter what. It's going to guarantee your success. And that, oh, everything's going to be perfectly normal 20 years from now, and we won't have like an extreme amount of like flooding or hurricanes or tornadoes or firestorms and things like that. They make these assumptions that are not based in reality, because their personal experience is a unique experience in history that fundamentally cannot be replicated, specifically because of the Reaganomics that they themselves supported.